Hi, you're listening to Guy Fletcher from Dire Straits, and you're also listening to my weekly mixtape with Brian Colburn. Have a lovely day.
Welcome to my weekly mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. On tonight's special Song Dive edition of the show, I'm joined by Dire Straits' Guy Fletcher, who spent the last decades as well with Mark Knopfler's solo band. Guy is an incredible music producer as well as a credited Dolby Atmos engineer, something I'm very excited to talk a little bit more about. Guy, thank you so much for joining me on my weekly mixtape.
It's a pleasure, Brian. Good to be here.
Well, before we dive into things, I'd like to start by asking you my first-time guest question, and that is, Guy, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
Oh, well, it's a collection of one's favorite songs, isn't it? It's the stuff you want to listen to when you're doing whatever you're doing, driving or vacuuming. I don't know. Yeah, it reminds me of when I was a kid, cassette tapes and just putting all your favorite stuff onto tape into one format. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yes, and today I get to talk about a lot of the songs that you have recorded on that made a lot of my mixtapes growing up. Now, Guy, your tenure with Dire Straits began on the 1985 album Brothers in Arms, but you worked with Mark prior to that on a few soundtrack albums, being 1984's Cal, along with Comfort and Joy. Could you talk about how your musical relationship with Mark came together and then evolved into your role with Dire Straits?
Yeah, we got together in yes, it was 83, I think. And he was looking for somebody to work with him on these two soundtracks he was planning on doing, Cal and Comfort and Joy, because he'd just bought this thing called the Synclavier, which was a very state-of-the-art digital music system, and he needed somebody to A, operate it, and B, realize his musical ideas. And that's exactly kind of what I do. I took one look at it and thought, well, how hard can it be? So I skimmed through the manual and figured out the essence of it. And yeah, we set to work pretty much straight away. He played me a lot of the stuff that he was into at the time. There was a lot of J.J. Cale and some Dylan stuff and some blues things. And I was very much into the same sort of stuff. So we hit it off straight away. And yeah, pretty soon we realized that we had a good working relationship together, and he could get his stream of ideas down, because at the time, well, I mean, he's always had an incredible stream of, yes, ideas. He's very prolific, obviously, with his songs, but his music, his musicality it just pours out of him. And I was sort of the facilitator and enabled him to record it.
Now, diving into the Brothers in Arms album, Money for Nothing was the song that introduced me to the band, given my age, before my father could take that opportunity to bring me down the Dire Straits rabbit hole, if you will. I've always wondered if the song's main introduction was recorded prior to Sting's involvement, or how that collaboration came together.
Yeah, the intro to Money for Nothing was, yes, it was put on the track after the main track was recorded, I seem to recall. Sting came in a little after that. The track was actually, at one point, it was in the bin. We weren't going to carry on with it.
Really?
And Neil Dorsman, the producer, who Neil just did a fantastic job on that album, by the way. Neil and I said, because Mark was getting a bit fed up with it, the band weren't really inspired by it. And Neil and I said, come on, let's go back in the studio after dinner. This is one evening. And Neil said, get on the Yamaha synth, the DX1, and I'm hearing some kind of dinosaur sound. So I came up with this sound and did this sort of what I call the crash sound, which features all the way through the main body of the song. And Mark heard it the next morning, and his enthusiasm for the track was revived, and he put his guitar on right that day. And then the track just, everybody sort of started to get excited about the track again. And the intro did, yeah, that came about a little later. And then, of course, Sting just happened to be on the island on holiday, and our paths collided. The coincidences started to happen. And yeah, he found himself on the song. And yeah, the next thing you know, we've sort of built this, what's become an epic, but we had no idea at the time that it was going to do what it did. Indeed, the album. We were just making another album. We didn't really expect it to be what it became.
Well, I guess in a case of poetic foreshadowing, Money for Nothing, complete with the I Want My MTV opening lyrics, became a huge staple on, wouldn't you guess it, MTV. When
Yeah.
the band was making this music video, was there a sense that you were treading some new ground visually? Because this was one of the more unique video concepts of the entire decade.
Yeah. I think when we saw the first animation, yeah, we definitely thought this is different in a really good way. I remember being excited about it. Obviously, I wasn't involved in the production of the video.
Mm-hmm.
We were pretty busy at the time because as soon as we finished the album, we started the tour. So we were really kind of swept away without really thinking too much about the album's success. The next thing we knew, we seemed to be number one everywhere. It didn't really hit us until long afterwards because we were just so busy. And, I mean, the band had been so busy before my involvement. I mean, the number of gigs Mark and the band had done, just trying to get a foothold in, trying to find some sort of success. The band worked very, very hard, and it's very easy to forget that the amount of work that went in the early days. But yeah, we just got swept away on this wave of success, and obviously the MTV link hyped it to a massive degree, and it was a great time to be involved in music video.
Well, in 70 plus episodes of my weekly mixtape, I've only been able to ask this question one other time, and that was to Bill Gibson, who's the drummer for Huey Lewis and the News. Money for Nothing, both the song and accompanying video, were parodied by Weird Al Yankovic as Beverly Hillbillies, the video of which was included in his feature-length movie UHF.
Yeah.
Growing up listening to all the music Weird Al was parodying, I've always wondered what the actual artist's thoughts were on his renditions. So were Dire Straits a fan of Beverly Hillbillies?
Yeah, we loved Weird Al. And when he did Money for Nothing, we just thought fantastic. Mark and I actually played on it. He approached us and yeah, we added a couple of, he played his guitar and I played that sound that features on the track. Yeah, we absolutely loved it.
In all my years of listening to Weird Al, I did not know you played on that track. That is so awesome.
Yeah, a little known fact.
Well, diving back to Brothers in Arms also featured one of my personal favorite Dire Straits songs, which is Walk of Life, a song that's been covered by countless artists, including Shooter Jennings, who recorded a country version back in 2007. This song features your keyboard part as the lead melody, and while the song features a lot of tasty guitar fills, there's no actual full-blown solo sections, which was something that was very prominent throughout the 80s musically. Was that the band's original intent, or was that kind of how the song unfolded in the studio?
No, I think that's how the song was written. Mark feels strongly about the fact that the song should be complete before it's recorded. Obviously, things do change. Money for Nothing certainly changed. Walk of Life was always that kind of finger-picking style of electric guitar playing, and it never really needed anything else. It's obviously such a catchy tune and a wonderful lyric. But yeah, it didn't change in any way. That track just kind of happened very naturally. And again, yeah, that sound came from that same synth again, the Yamaha DX1, which is pretty prominent throughout the whole album. That big FM sound.
Now, after the success of Brothers in Arms, you worked on the soundtrack to the 1987 film The Princess Bride with both Mark Knopfler and Willie DeVille, who we sadly lost in 2009. For folks my age, mid-40s, that movie is our childhood treasure. And I think the score and soundtrack play such a pivotal role in selling the movie's fairy tale atmosphere. In terms of scoring this movie, were the songs written after the movie was filmed, or were you working in conjunction with the filming? Because they're so cohesive together.
No, we weren't working. I mean, obviously, Mark wrote all the music for that. And I performed, I think it was 98 or 99% of it because it was done on the synclavier. There were only a couple of things that weren't synclavier, which was Mark played a nylon guitar. But the songs weren't, obviously, they were written to the scenes, as in any normal film. but it is a completely unique soundtrack, isn't it? In the way that it does, like you said, lend itself to the fairy tale, and it sort of happened by accident because nowadays scoring is done on with samples, and the technology available now means that composers can recreate the orchestra and then record it with real players when the budget allows.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Princess Bride, we were planning on doing just that, but for one reason or another, we didn't. And Rob Reiner loved what we were doing, and it has that sort of unreal bad sample sound to it. Because if you listen to the sounds, the actual samples, they're not that great. They're pretty sort of sucky strings, as I call them. They don't really they don't really lend themselves. They don't really compare to the real thing at all. But it really, really helped, as you said. It really helped the atmosphere in the movie, the whole fairy tale, the whole otherworldliness of it. And I've never come across another soundtrack that sounds like that. So I think that does have, I'd like to think it played some part in its, cult success, because it certainly does have that status, doesn't it? I mean,
It certainly does.
For me, it's a big movie because it's the time that I got together with my wife, who I'm still married to now. So we were working in LA, and yes, we kind of got together around that time. And when I took her to see one of the screenings at Princess Bride, it was quite a special moment. So yeah, so it's very big in my heart, that movie, and obviously, yeah, I love it.
Same here. Well, looking at Dire Straits' final studio album, 1991's On Every Street, I'd like to first talk a little bit about Heavy Fuel. And I apologize in advance, Guy, but this is where my musical nerdum is going to come into play here. I hope this isn't too deep in the weeds, but
I like a nerd.
Recently, the song came up on one of my streaming playlists, and I immediately realized it sounded different. And when I pulled out my original CD, because On Every Street was one of the first 5 CDs I purchased with my own money, I listened to it hundreds of times. I realized there's an extra 4 measures of music before the second and third verses on any subsequent later productions of the album, but not the original release. Was the longer version the band's original intent, or was there like an alternate take that was a label decision or something?
No. The original would have been the longer version. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, I think they were just edits done for the original release. Yeah, that's a good point. I'll have to go and listen to that. I do remember it vaguely. I didn't do the edits, but Chuck Ainley will have done them. Yeah, I remember shooting the video. That was a lot of fun with Randy Quaid in Sheffield Arena in the UK. That was absolutely hilarious.
That it was. Well, the other song I want to talk about from On Every Street is The Bug, which a year later was covered by Mary Chapin Carpenter, whose version became a huge country hit, peaking at number 16 on Billboard's Hot Country Singles and Tracks. Earlier, I had mentioned Shooter Jennings covering Walk of Life as well. Is there a musical correlation between the country genre and Dire Straits that makes these interpretations translate so seamlessly?
Yeah, well, obviously, Mark is very much inspired by country, what I would call original country. The time he spent in Nashville, particularly when we were working with Chet Atkins. Yeah, I mean, his musical history goes back a long way, into the Americas. And I think a lot of Mark's songs, if not all of them, are influenced both by folk music over here, and folk music in America, and country too. So yeah, there's definitely a big pull. And I think around that time, especially, he was writing stuff that was very easily coverable by country artists. I mean, you could argue that album is kind of a country album. Certainly a lot of people called it that, although we never did. But yeah, quite a few of those tunes are essentially just country tunes. And yeah, good songs too. So that's why they get covered, because they're good songs.
Completely agree. Now, you had brought up Chet Atkins recording with Mark, and I want to talk about the Neck and Neck album for a second, if you don't mind. On that is a cover of a cover, as Yakety Axe is a
Yeah.
cover of Boots Randolph's Yakety Sax, only the
Yeah.
version you guys recorded in 1991 featured an updated arrangement with new lyrics by Merle Travis. I'd love to hear about the dynamics of working with both Mark and Chet together and what the
Yeah.
two of them brought out of each other musically on that album.
Wow, it was a wonderful experience to be in any room with both of them because they really hit it off. Chet was fascinated by Mark's thumb. I remember that he used to comment on the size of Mark's thumb and couldn't believe how he could do what he did with it on the guitar. And obviously Mark's love of Chet and his music and his history throughout the early Nashville when Chet was producing in Nashville, Mark was massively influenced by that and a huge admirer of Chet. So when they got together, it just seemed like a match made in heaven. And of course, they became very close friends. And it was such a sad moment when we lost Chet.
Yeah.
But working with them was so much. It was just so much fun. Chet was a very funny man and very generous, very warm, and incredibly talented. And hearing the two guitar players together, because they didn't play the same, they complemented each other beautifully. And because Mark understood that genre, and Chet certainly understood Mark and loved, I suppose the more rock and roll side of where Mark was coming from. Yeah, the making of that album was a lot of fun. We made it in several different places. Some of it was done in Nashville in Chet's house, and some of it was done in London in Mark's old studio, which was in a little Muse. Awful place, really, but since then we've moved on a long way, and obviously Mark built his wonderful British Grove Studios, which is where we record now. But we did make a lovely album, and yeah, it was a wonderful, very happy time.
Well, you recently compiled and mixed the 2023 Dire Straits live box set, which included the unreleased 1979 Rainbow Theater show. Without getting too deep into the technical aspects of studio mixing, though I could probably talk about that all day, given the live recording limitations in 1979, at least in comparison to what's available now, how many audio channels were you working with on this mix? And did you face any challenges in that project that maybe wouldn't be prevalent in this day and age, considering we're working with pretty much limitless digital options?
No, it was well recorded. It was as simple as that. It was done by, I don't know who the engineer was. I can't remember, but it was done on the Manor Mobile, which was a very busy, popular mobile recording unit. It was just 24 tracks, just 2-inch analog. And when I put the first tracks up, I just thought, well, this is going to be absolutely fine. It wasn't a problem. It got a bit, because it was the last night of the tour and there were some guest artists, it got a bit crazy at the end. There was I think one of the encore numbers, there are two basses playing.
Oh.
And which I kind of had to sort of skirt around because it was pretty messy. But overall, it was just really well recorded. And when you've got good source material, there's really no excuse for not making a great mix. Obviously, though, there was a bit of spill as always, but it was a lovely big. The Rainbow was a great room to record in, and the guys who did it knew what they were doing. So I was kind of blessed to have the opportunity to do that. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, now I'm excited to dive into the track that's the feature of our episode today, Going Home, theme from Local Hero. The track was originally recorded in 1983 for the soundtrack to the movie Local Hero. But in 2024, the song has been given a total overhaul and has been re-recorded for the benefit of charity as it aids both Teenage Cancer Trust and Teen Cancer America. Before we dive into the song itself, how did the charitable nature of this song come about?
Well, it was an idea that the idea didn't come from us. It came from a chap called Peter Bradley, who is heavily involved with the charities and in particular the Buddy Holly Foundation. And he and a guy called Mike Reed, a DJ in London, came up with the idea of using that track to try and generate some money for Teen Cancer America and Teenage Cancer Trust. They went ahead and recorded a little version of it in Nashville. This is before our involvement. And then they sent it to Mark and I and asked if Mark would like to play on it. And he said, well, yeah, I'll play on the bits that they've got right. And we'll, so we did. I recorded his guitar and then I thought, well, hang on, there's more to this because the track that they recorded was great. And they just didn't have a very good intro. The intro was kind of free time and it didn't really go it meandered a little bit. And it occurred to me that if it had the proper intro like the original, it would be much more playable on for players to come on board. So we had recorded that track, an instrumental version, coincidentally for the Local Hero musical, which we started working on in 2016. And Mark was insistent that he wanted to record demos with the band of all the songs. They were completely unused. We never used them. We never released them. They were just demos. And of course, we recorded going home. And I thought, well, if I can just tag that on. So I spent a day doing a big multi-track edit, tagged it on the front of their version and said, there we go. Now we've got a track. And the charity said, you've got to produce it. So that's when I became the producer. And then as soon as that was done, Mark played a little bit more on it. And suddenly everybody wanted to be involved because Mark had become involved. So all our mates wanted to pile in. So Townsend and Clapton showed up. Albert Lee was one of the first to come on. And so I recorded a lot of them at British Grove at Mark's studio. And then as word spread and as people were asked, I had an influx of, it just became more and more players. And of course, the track, which was originally 3 or 4 minutes long, had to be extended. So at each stage, I would edit and extend the track. I had an inkling that it would be quite big in terms of the number of players. So I prepared myself for 6-7 minute track. I wasn't quite expecting the 10 minutes that the version is. But once we got Ringo on board and Zach, his son, also, I had quite a lot of drums to play with. So I was able to have enough material to extend. I never repeated anything in the track. It was always fresh because there was just so much stuff to come to use. But, it was, probably the biggest editing job I've ever undertaken. But, by the same token, it was done over a 2.5 year period. So the thing evolved in a nice way.
Just to give listeners a small sample, you had over 60 musicians on the track without going through the entire list, because that could probably take as long as the song itself. Ronnie Wood, Jeff Beck, Alex Lifeson, Slash, Bruce Springsteen. You mentioned Eric Clapton and Roger Daltrey, Peter Frampton, David Gilmour, Tony Iommi, Brian May, Tom Morello, obviously Mark and yourself. Did you ask each artist to play through the song in its entirety and then mix their different guitar parts together? Or were the artists tasked with tackling specific segments in the song?
No, pretty much I didn't ask anybody to play anything specific, apart from a couple of instances where I thought something would be really good. Most of the players, nearly all the players, I just said, play as much as you want or as little as you want, wherever you want, and I'll work it out. Leave it to me to work out. Because, and I had explained to a lot of them that the track was being edited. It was so if you play in section C, it may not actually end up in C, it might end up in E, because I obviously had to number or letter all the different sections. Mm-hmm. So I created a lot of stems, the usual drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, and I had two or three main guitar tracks that I would keep updating as the track evolved. And I would say to players, take those two guitar tracks out and then just play wherever you want. Don't worry about if something gets in the way, take it out and I'll put it together. And they pretty much came to me one at a time. So I was able to make it work. It's not like I mounted a whole load of stuff and I had to deal with it. I dealt with each individual player pretty much as soon as they'd done it and then mixed the track. So at each stage, the track got mixed as if it was finished because I figured that was the only way to do it. Finish it at each stage and then open it up again and then mix it again. And as a consequence, there are 52 different mixes of the track. But it seemed to me the only way to keep it from being crowded. You know, the one thing I didn't want to do was to have it become a mess. And it's close because there's so much going on. But I think it's worked out. You know, and you know, there was a lot of great material that I was given that had to go by the wayside just because it just didn't. There wasn't space for it. So, you know, creating space was the name of the game, really. And of course, Jeff Beck was one of the major contributors. It was his last recording, sadly, as Dwayne Eddy. Dwayne Eddy. It's also very sadly his last recording.
And from a listener's perspective, it truly feels like you took all 60 musicians into a room and were just, it sounds so seamless as if they're all playing this song together. Yeah. That's an insanely difficult musical picture to paint, but what you did is very vivid. You hear each guitarist complementing each other and telling that story musically. It truly feels like you were pointing at them one by one in a live room.
Thank you. You know, a lot of it was to do with sonics, and I was very keen to have each player's sound come across as much as what they play, because all of these players have their own unique sound. I'm a big fan of every one of them. I mean, they all have a sound, and I was very keen to make sure that you could hear and distinguish their sound. That was my kind of, you know, when I picked up on something that Gilmour played, there was a couple of licks that he played because he gave me loads and loads of stuff. But there were a couple of licks that I just said, that's David Gilmour. It's unmistakable. So those had to go in. So there were, you know, I'd give them a big red mark and they were the ones that would go in. And it was the same with everybody else. You know, Frampton did an incredible job. He gave me so much stuff, so much, you know, multi-layering. You know, the end section is pretty much built around Frampton's contribution, and Brian May as well. Just very typical, very much them.
Have you thought about alternate mixes in some kind of album form with all different versions of the song, given all this source material?
I've thought about it, but it's just kind of too, well, it wouldn't be the same. I mean, you could do another mix, and it would be another version of it that would be completely unique stuff, because there is so much stuff. But I think it would dilute it. I think what we have is, you know, I'm reluctant to use the word classic, but it keeps getting bandied about. It is what it is. It's a lovely melody. It's a lovely piece of music, and which is why it worked in the first place. So it was a good idea, and I was just very happy to make it happen.
Well, off the top of your head, do you have a rough percentage of how many artists you worked with in person versus remotely at alternate studios?
I think there were only about 12 of the players came into British Grove to record in person. Although, no, maybe a few more because there was Mark's entire band are on it as well. So, yeah, at different stages. Yes, obviously they played on it 4 years before the track was even conceived. So, because their contribution came from an early recording. So
yes.
Yeah, it's kind of odd, but yeah. So I suppose about 16, maybe 17 people out of however many it is, 65. I've lost count.
Any of those sessions bring out like a memory, like, oh my God, we're doing this here in person?
Yeah, absolutely. All of them. Albert Lee was just so sweet, and everything he played was just so Albert. Pete Townsend came in and he had this little tiny amp, and I just thought, oh, hang on, I want Pete Townsend. I want his sound. I want his big sound. And as soon as he played the first chord, Mark and I looked at each other and went, "Yeah, okay, that's Pete." We just got this incredible sound from this little twin. Eric Eric gave me a whole top to bottom pass on acoustic and on electric, and I just thought, I just, it was like all my Christmases had come at once. Everything. You could just do the track, just listen to Eric, to be honest with you, because everything he played was beautiful. And he kept saying to me at the end, "Are you sure do you want more? Do you want more? Because I'm a bit out of practice." I just said, "God, Eric, just get out of here." Perfect. And Ronnie Wood came in quite late on. They were just about to start rehearsals or they were getting together for their tour, and gave me a few big chords, and it just instantly sounded like the Stones, which was exactly what we wanted, exactly what Mark and I would. Mark was there when Ronnie came in. Yeah, and it was it was a lot of fun. Most of the day when these guys came in was most of the day was spent chatting and catching up because all these guys know each other, and
hmm
when Pete comes to the studio, we have lunch and we spend the afternoon talking, usually about recording gear, geeky stuff that you know all about. So yeah, it's friends catching up as much as anything.
Well, along with the musician roster that you've assembled, you also brought on board Sir Peter Blake, who designed the cover art for the
Yeah.
Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to create the artwork for the CD single and album and digital artwork. How did he become involved with the project?
Well, he was asked very early on by the people who conceived the idea, and he, yeah, very graciously said yes. So he knew about it at the very beginning, 2.5 years ago. He was struggling with his health at the time, so he didn't get around to doing anything for quite a while. But as soon as we saw what he did, and it was just perfect. It was just exactly what the project needed. And he came to we had a little launch playback at British Grove where a few of the players came. Joe Brown, Joe Nama Trading, Ronnie Wood, Albert Lee was there, and Sir Peter came to that, and so we did a little photo shoot, and it was just, yeah, it was lovely.
Well, for those listening who don't know this, as I mentioned at the top, Guy is an accredited Dolby Atmos engineer, which as an audio guy, I'm excited to learn a little bit more about. Can you maybe explain at like a top level what a Dolby Atmos music mix is for those who might not be familiar with it?
Yeah, it's really an immersive mix. It's a mix that comes from, instead of coming from stereo speakers, comes from multiple speakers all around you, or multiple sound sources. So the advantage is that the track becomes more open. You can kind of get inside it a little bit more. Well recorded pieces of music obviously benefit greatly from the technology. So if you take a lot of care with an album and you spend a lot of time getting sounds, when you do an Atmos mix, you can really kind of feature those sounds more, like particularly guitar sounds. We spend a lot of time working on the sounds on Mark's records, and not just the lead guitar, the acoustics, the all the other incidental instruments, and you can really pick them out and enjoy them with Atmos mixes. Of course, the problem with Atmos is to listen to it properly, you need a lot of loudspeakers. That is changing because I'm involved with a system called Air Sound Spatial, which is a way to listen to true Atmos from two, three, or four speakers. So
Wow.
it's very new. We're developing it now. We've done a couple of demonstrations and everybody's been completely blown away. So you're hearing it here first. Keep your ear out for Air Sound because the potential for consumers to be able to listen to Atmos to me is very exciting. To make it affordable, because I mean most artists are doing the mixes now. It's just that people aren't really able to hear them properly. You can hear them with the Apple headphones, and it's okay, and you can hear them with sound bars, but it's not true Atmos. So I think anything we can do to get it to the consumer is going to be a fantastic thing because it is a really enjoyable way to listen to music. It's our new favorite. Mark is totally in love with it. That and vinyl.
Yep.
I mean, it's a good records sound fantastic on vinyl and in Atmos too.
Having seen feature films using Dolby Atmos, you truly feel like you're being surrounded by the sound as well as what you're seeing on screen, but for music, just the sound.
Yeah.
What is your mindset different when you're mixing the song for Atmos versus a regular stereo recording that would just come through a CD player?
Yes and no. No, in that the main thing to focus on is the song still. You can't, it's very easy to pick it apart and for it to lose its cohesion, to lose the glue, because tracks work partly because of the glue that they have. With stereo mixes, when you master a song, you're kind of giving a little more glue with it, a little limiting, a little EQ to make it sort of pump a little bit more. That kind of disappears with Atmos because you don't really need to do that. So you have to sort of find other ways to give it a little bit of excitement if it needs it. So, it's very difficult to, it's very easy to get it wrong, I think. And really, I think for me, the rule is just keep the stereo as your guideline. And everybody who mixes Atmos does it the same, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
The stereo is what you're trying to maintain what the stereo achieves, but make it more immersive and more enjoyable. And that kind of happens naturally. It's just when you start to spread things out and use the format, it kind of happens by itself. You just have to be a little bit careful and a little bit subtle with certain things. But it's a lot of fun when you've got nicely recorded material. And obviously with keyboard sounds, you can, which is my domain. I love being able to pull keyboard sounds apart because so much of what I do is combination sounds. I don't just have a sound. It's often three or four sounds to get that sound. And they may not all come from a keyboard, but with Atmos, you can play around with pulling those apart and actually being able to identify the elements a little more. You can get quite geeky about it, but essentially the main thing is the song. The song is the main thing you have to keep in mind.
Do you see Dolby Atmos being the silver bullet that finally puts an end to the loudness wars that have been happening over the last 2 decades in music, the brick walling? Do you think that this could be the solution that brings people to quality sounding music versus just loud?
Well, I hope so. It's already starting to happen. I mean, most of the stuff I'm listening to in Atmos kind of doesn't sound like it's brick walled anymore because what's the point? It doesn't work when you brick wall something in Atmos. Well, some things do, but yeah, I'm enjoying listening to the way people are doing mixes, and I'm enjoying listening to the way people are experimenting with dynamics because Atmos gives you the dynamics, gives you them back. So you're right to sort of bring that up. The dynamics that we've lost, mind you, popular music was never very dynamic because you've got to get it to sound good out of a transistor radio. So get rid of your dynamics. But obviously, my background is very much about arrangement and working with Mark, Dire Straits. We took a lot of care in arrangement and dynamics, particularly on our live shows. Dynamics was a big part of it. So yes, to be able to explore that more is a very cool thing, and people are doing it.
Well, for you personally and with Mark in his band, are there any projects that you have right now that are going to follow up Going Home?
God, we've done so much work in the last couple of years, and it's all suddenly come out at once. I've kind of got no idea what's around the corner, which it's been great because I'm actually, for the first week, this week and last week, I haven't actually had anything to do. I'm mixing a couple of albums for some friends of mine, bands who want their albums done in Atmos. But apart from that, it's suddenly all very quiet. So I'm actually spending some time doing some acoustic treatment in my room, which I meant to do 20 years ago. So I finally found time to sort of do something like that. So to answer your question, there's nothing that I can mention that's coming up in the pipeline, but there's bound to be some stuff just around the corner. I know Mark wants to record more music, so yeah.
Well, congratulations on Going Home, Guy. The single came out amazing. It is such a great cause that you're doing it for, and this has been an absolute honor. Thank you so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape.
It's a pleasure, Brian. Thank you.
And for those listening, remember, you can find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.